All right, if you are just now starting to switch from cutting to lean bulking, or you're about to, then there's a couple things you want to know before we talk about the best macros for lean bulking. And so number one is that just because you're in a surplus, just because you're bulking now does not mean that you get to eat everything in the house and that you get to throw all those good eating habits that you found while cutting or you developed while cutting and dieting. It doesn't mean that you just get to throw all those out the window just because you're in a surplus. It is simply just an increase in calories. It is not a ticket to go in the pantry and eat all the snacks that you couldn't or were staying away from while cutting. Another thing is that protein is still very important, albeit not as important as it was while you were cutting. It is still important to get a high protein diet while bulking, while lean bulking. You still want to make sure that your meals actually satisfy you and that they are mostly semi-healthy most of the time. Yes, you have more calories to work with, but make sure your meals actually fill you up, they satisfy you, so again, you don't have the urge or feel like you need to go eat everything in your pantry. That is not what bulking is all about. It's just an increase in calories, you guys. Anyways, with all that out of the way, I've talked a lot about macros on this channel, but not necessarily the best macros for lean bulking. And so if you watch any of my past videos, then you might know that I recommend the 40-40-20 macro split, which is 40% protein, 40% carbs, and 20% fat. And while I do think this is a great macro split for any fitness goal, whether it be to maintain, cut, or lean bulk, I think you can change it a little bit for lean bulking. You see, when you're cutting, protein right behind your calorie deficit is of the utmost importance. When you're in a surplus, however, your body isn't as reliant on that protein to maintain and keep muscle or even grow muscle because it's in a deficit. But when you're in a surplus, it's not as reliant on it. Therefore, the 40% protein rule isn't as required or necessary when you're in a surplus. Now, there are some studies that suggest that a high protein intake while bulking and even maintaining has resulted in some recomposition effects, which just means losing fat and building muscle at the same time. I suggest watching Jeff Nippard's video on recomposition for more information on that topic.
Set up your macronutrient targets, starting with protein, the most important macro for recomposition. In the book, we recommend a sliding model for protein intake. And in my last full day of eating video, I explained the benefits of going higher on protein than might be required just to build muscle. So even though you could probably get away with less, I think eating a higher intake is both safe and advised for those looking for recon.
Anyways, with all that being said, you guys, I believe the best macros for lean bulking are ones that allow you to enjoy your surplus without going overboard with calories. And so, for example, while cutting, my recommendations are to eat high protein so you get more satisfied and feel full from your meals while cutting, as well as having low calorie, high volume meals as well for the same reasons. When bulking, you don't have to do this, but it is a good idea just so you feel full, you feel good, and you don't want to eat everything in the house. And so now let's talk about the 3 macronutrients for lean bulking. So first, we're going to talk about protein. So as stated earlier, protein doesn't have to be necessarily as high as it was while cutting. I think it should be anywhere from 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Now, if you saw my past video on the best macros for cutting, I recommended the higher end, so 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. But now that you are in a surplus and your body isn't in a deficit, that 0.8 to 1 gram of protein range should be better for you and allows you to have more carbs and more fats in your surplus. And speaking of carbs, I think carbs should be really high while lean bulking, because when you're in a surplus, this allows for a more aggressive training routine, a more aggressive workout split that you probably couldn't have ran while you were cutting, right? Because you're in a deficit, you don't recover as well. And being in a surplus allows for this. And you want to fuel these more aggressive workout splits, workouts in general, with carbs as your fuel for energy for those workouts. So again, carbs should be high because they need to fuel these workouts. It allows for better training performance. And so now let's talk about fats really quick. And so my recommendation for fats remains the same as it was in cutting for lean bulking. And I recommend that to be on the lower ends and giving priority to protein and carbs. Fats should be higher even if the percentage remains the same, just because of the simple fact that you are in a surplus. However, I wouldn't go lower than 20% of your total calorie intake for fat in general, regardless if you're lean bulking or maintaining or cutting. And so now let's talk about some some macro splits. So in general, I recommend the following macro splits for lean bulking. So the 40-40-20 split, this is still a great split that I recommend. I actually talked about it in my 40-40-20 diet video. You can check that out if you want. But essentially, if you want to check out Jeff Nippard's video on why a high protein diet may benefit you while bulking or maintaining for recomposition purposes, which is just losing fat and building muscle, definitely check that out, because a high protein diet, regardless of if you're cutting, bulking, or trying to recomp, is probably gives you the best chance for success. Again, watch that Jeff Nippard video that I'll link down below. Another popular macro split that I love while lean bulking is the 30-50-20 macro split, and this is what I run. This is essentially great for bulking, especially if you love carbs. It still gives you a sufficient amount of protein while allowing you to load up on carbs for optimal training performance, and I use this again most of the time while bulking. And so the last split, the 35-35-30 macro split, is great for a more balanced split for those of you who want more fat in their diet while still following the high protein, high carbohydrate rule. And so in conclusion, those are the best macros for bulking in my opinion. You guys can leave some comments down below if you want to give out some other macro splits that you guys have followed while lean bulking and seen success with. And so the whole point of this video is to not make it more complicated than it has to be. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them, and I will see you guys in the next video.